Alright, welcome to the Illusion Scholar General deck tech. Here he is. Horsemanship, so he can't be blocked. Whenever Illusion Scholar General deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. This effect is going to be mostly attacking. I did not build this towards ping effects. You want to start with 4 mana, or around 3, in your opening hand to make sure he comes out early and attacks often. Let's start with the first cards. We have the Flood of Mars. I am a Doctor Who fan, but only for, the Doctor that you are introduced to. I don't remember this episode, so this might be before or after when I watched Christopher Eccleston and the other guy. There's a 4-cost creature, alien zombie horror. So aliens are new to Magic, zombie horror, quite common. There's going to be a lot of synergy with this if they allow unbanned unsets. It has Island Walk. Island Walk is going to be a theme because water always wins. Whenever the Flood of Mars attacks, put a flood counter on another target creature or land. If it's a creature, it becomes a copy of the Flood of Mars. If it's a land, it becomes an island in addition to its other types. So, a creature that's giving you a problem, turn it into a 3/3. And this effect is also on the other creature. That will start exponentially creating more Flood of Mars or more islands. More islands is what I would seek for until damage time. Because we'll start into the lands. Most decks have Temple of the False God. Monocolor decks want a Shrine to Nyx, tap, add colorless, or this and 2 more lands, so 3 mana. Choose a color, add to your mana pool the same amount equal to your devotion, which is all the mana symbols in that card. So this one would give 2. Here we have Riptide Laboratory. Pay 1 and a blue. Return target wizard you control to its owner's hand. And there's going to be a few wizards with very good effects. We have Dread Sanctuary. So when you need a creature, he's your guy. 4/2 Golem artifact creature until the end of turn. It's still a land. The utility of having a creature at any time, very beneficial, and when need be, he can become an island and still have this effect. Encroaching Wastes. All decks need something to balance each other out. This makes sure no one gets something that isn't too overpowered without indestructible. If they have a cascading bluffs and it's very beneficial early, this will strike it down. Now we go on to all the basics. Around 24. Just some from Tarkir, Theros, any set you have handy. M10. Certainly like the Time Spiral designs. Very classy islands. Obviously, the more utility lands you have, the more you can turn them into islands. But having a strong monocolor mana base always helps. As the game will progress, you know that they'll keep printing very good lands that are also islands in addition to their other types. Basic lands as well became very useful. We have, well, that's a pretty land. The Phyrexian lands, very cool. Don't really see them much because of the War of the Machines didn't really pan out. Ravnica, of course, very popular, so much so. Spelltwine for 6. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard and target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard. Copy those cards, cast the copies if able without paying their mana costs. Exile Spelltwine. Very useful. Many people have very powerful cards. You want to play your best card and copy it, like Recurring Insight. Now initially it has a 6 heavy mana cost, draw cards equal to the number of cards in target opponent's hand, very useful, very Zendikar style, with Rebound. So a good way to remember is exiling it, and then at the beginning of your turn, using it. Another option with Spell Twine as well. Here we have Knowledge Exploitation. Your general is not a rogue, but Prowl is very useful. Search target opponent's library for an instant or sorcery card. You may play that card without paying its mana cost, then that player shuffles his or her library. For 7, you'll probably be able to play it, but with Shapeshifter or something with a rogue identity, very useful. You can get that damage in quickly with Swift Boots. The poor man's Lightning Greaves. If you can't afford Lightning Greaves, you at least have Swift Boots, which has equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste. So Lightning Greaves may give Shroud. This gives Hexproof. And here we have Planar Overlay. This is very useful for multicolor decks because this will not punish you as much. Each player chooses a land he or she controls of each basic land type. Return those lands to their owner's hands. For 3 mana, very early, you can bounce quite a lot of land and only have to return 1 to your hand. And sometimes, of course, you can use that for your draw, for your 1 land per turn. Here we have Deep Analysis. Target player draws 2 cards. 4 mana, flashback. Pay 2 mana, pay 3 life, and you get to draw 2 cards again. Very useful. Always want to draw more cards with 1 card. This gives you a bonus of 6, basically like a Pot of Greed for any blue deck. Inscription Insight for 4 and a kicker for 4. Choose one. If this spell was kicked, choose any number instead. So you would only pick one of these effects for 4, or you get all the effects for 8. You return up to 2 target creatures to their owner's hands for sorcery speed. Scry 2, then draw 2 cards. Very useful. Target player creates an XX blue illusion creature token, where X is the number of cards in their hand. Overall, great stuff. The most important one being returning 2 creatures to their owner's hands, as I see it, because creating an illusion creature, not always happening, but if you can do all of them, it's at least a 2/2, then you draw cards. So 4 cost, return creatures, you get to play it more often. Good curve. The more effects, the better. Flow of Ideas, a very old Lorwyn style card. Draw a card for each island you control. So basic lands, basic islands, useful. 6 of them, draw 6 cards. But if you have other lands that are also islands, incredibly powerful as well. We have Inundate for 6, return all non-blue creatures to their owner's hands. Just 1 more Marrow card to return everything and have the board state to your advantage with your Sapphire Medallion, keeping all your things very low cost. The artifacts, keep them low, keep them effective, like a Whisper Silk Cloak, once more giving your creatures evasion. Equipped creature is unblockable. Equipped creature has Shroud, so for 5 mana, it's going in to hit. Heraldic Banner for 3. Choose a color, blue. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+0. Add 1 mana of the chosen color. So for 3 cost, Banner Mana Rock, strong effect. Might be stronger than Extra Planar Lens. You play it, you imprint it, which means removing target land you control from the game, which is a steep cost because you're exiling one of your lands in advantage. But you do get, whenever a land with the same name as the imprinted card is tapped for mana, so the specific name of it, basic island, its controller adds 1 mana of his or her mana pool of any type that land produced. Basically, all islands will produce. Name word island will be producing 2. I use this over High Tide just because High Tide is a instant, or giving your cards one use, but extra planar lens giving utility, and it may not always benefit you to the nth degree because it gives everyone who uses islands the same effect, specifically the named card. But, well, you need the mana production. It will help you ramp up for things like Mind Splice Apparatus, artifact with flash, so 2 lands can produce this for 4. At the beginning of your upkeep, put an oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus, so on your opponent's turn, at the end of their turn, play this, you get an oil counter on your turn. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each oil counter on Mind Splice Apparatus. At the beginning of your turn, you'll have +1 oil counter. You'll be reducing all your spells, instants, and sorceries by 1. Here we have Power Gauntlet, similar to the other artifacts. The extra planar lens. This Gauntlet of Power for 5. As Gauntlet of Power comes into play, choose a color, blue. Creatures of the chosen color get +1/+1, so not just yours, but all, but mostly benefiting you. And multicolored blue cards. Whenever a basic land is tapped for the mana of the chosen color, so again, naming basic land will give you one of these benefits. The less people with a basic land will give this card more uses in the future if you are going the basic route. Here we have something to keep it very fun is Stasis. Players do not get an untap phase. Pay 1 blue during your upkeep, or Stasis is destroyed. Cards do not untap until their next untap phase. Even the turn you play it, pass it, and then they will not get to untap, means this is like a sleep for 2 mana. Here we have Arcane Laboratory. Laboratory for 3 mana is an enchantment. Again, very useful because of a blue deck using instants, speed. Each players can play more than 1 spell each turn. The opponents will, of course, have instants of their own, but you're more often going to have the card advantage, assuming Luzon is attacking. Equilibrium will also help you keep the advantage. Whenever you play a creature spell, you may pay 1. If you do, return target creature to its owner's hand. For 3 mana, and then playing Luzon for 5, you've already given yourself a advantage with Equilibrium. But it's selective. You can even politic with it for very powerful effects. Levitation, being one of the best cards to keep evasion for all your cards as we get into the creatures. A standard enchantment. Of course, it'll be power crept in the future, or maybe already is, but for 4 mana, give all your creatures flying. Always useful, and especially as we go through the creatures. Like Sea Dasher Octopus. Ikoria was not very popular as I see it, but Flash is an effective effect with Mutate, so at instant speed you get to mutate a creature, non-human creature. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. In Synergy, you're giving it the effect to draw a card for 3. There's better cards at 1 mana, like I can think of Sixth Sense for green, but for blue and giving a stacking ability, it's not awful. And of course, neat effect, it keeps coming back. With Sakashima Student, another card where you're attacking, you want to return your creature to your hand and play it for its ninjutsu cost, and then you get to copy another creature on the battlefield and deal damage as that creature. Again, the effects of going in unblocked with, let's say, a Whisper Silk or anything makes this more effective, as well as copying a card, then dealing damage. One of the better Shinobi effects, just like the Mindbreaker Oni. Spellblade. You know the one. We have Elite Arcanist for 4, one of the wizards. Elite Arcanist enters the battlefield. You may exile an instant card from your hand, normally a cheap counterspell. And for X, copy the spell card played. You may pay its mana cost with X that you exiled. Very simple. The Laboratory Wizard will keep Riptide Laboratory will keep him safe, but it will eat cards out of your hand. But if you're making his effect consistent, you're definitely able to at least counter a few spells. Very cool card. Probably going to be one of the cards that gets pinged for 1, but with shrivel effects and your +1/+1 to blue creatures, he might live more often. Lunar Mystic is more draw power. For 4 mana, he gets you a human wizard with 2/2. Slightly stronger than the last card, but whenever you cast an instant spell, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card. Straight up bonus. Human cards from Avacyn, they just wanted to give you good things. This is one of them. So as you play your instants, your counter spells, he gets a lot of play. Who can afford to pay 1 more for instants? You can with your doubled mana base. Archmage's Emeritus for 4. Human Wizard again with Magecraft. Magecraft is specifically asking you to play instant and sorcery spells, draw a card. More effective than Lunar Mystic in a way, but also doubling down. You want more of the same effect. As we get into non-human creatures with a fish, Tidal Barracuda. Very cool card. Any player may cast spells as though they had flash. Your opponent can't cast spells during your turn. Basically a ley line for the board. Everyone gets to use this, but not on your turn. No one's going to kill it for you. No one's going to make sure no one else kills it because, well, they also want flash. I think this was also printed in the same Ikoria set because it is that kind of style. Serpent of the Endless Sea. He can't attack unless the defending player controls an island. 1 more use for the Flood, but also his power and toughness are equal to the number of islands you control. There's about 24 islands in here, but as you can make more islands, he may even get bigger. Ideally, he's a 5/5 for 5. Mischievous Quainar, I don't know if that's even a name, is for 5. He's a 3/3. You morph him for 3, and then you get to morph him, unmorph, for 3. When Mischievous Quainar is turned face up, copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for that copy. What does that mean? He's a doubling effect, copying your instants and sorceries, and you can turn him back face down for 5. That makes him very unique and not often used. If you can trick them into like not letting him die, or maybe even, you know, you could make an extra turn with this. Copy target instant or sorcery means any of them useful, because your Storm Surge Kraken wants your general to be out. He's a 5/5, hexproof as long as you control your commander. Storm Surge Kraken gets +2/+2, and whenever Storm Surge Kraken becomes blocked, you may draw 2 cards. Doubling down on your general's effect to draw cards. He gives +2 to himself and has hexproof. He's going to be a problem for anyone not blocking him at a very strong rate. Arbiter of the Ideal, flying. When it untaps, put a manifestation counter on a artifact, creature, or land from the top of your deck you revealed. Whenever Arbiter of the Ideal becomes untapped, reveal the top card of your library. If it's an artifact, creature, or land card, you may put it onto the battlefield with a manifestation counter on it. The permanent is an enchantment in addition to its other types. Not awful, because every turn you get a new free card after it untaps. Theros, being a heavy enchantment set, also had monstrosity creatures like Shipbreaker Kraken. For 6, he's a 6/6. When Shipbreaker Kraken becomes monstrous, tap up to 4 target creatures. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's untap step for as long as you control Shipbreaker Kraken. Very, very strong, better than the Arbiter of the Ideal, but also could be produced by Arbiter of the Ideal when it untaps. And that leaves your mana open at any time to make it monstrous. It doesn't say must be monstrous at sorcery speed. It just says pay 8 mana, monstrosity 4, put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Colossal Whale. Here it is a 7 cost 5/5 with Island Walk, meaning if you gave your opponent 1 island, it can attack unblocked. Whenever Colossal Whale attacks, you may exile target creature defending player controls until Colossal Whale leaves the battlefield, basically eating a creature. It reminds me of Ixidrone or other cards. Forget the Phyrexian Ingester style. And here we have another Theros card, the Scourge of Fleets. When Scourge of Fleets enters the battlefield, return each creature your opponent controls with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X is the number of islands you control. Maxing out at 24 with your basic. For 7, he's returning 7 cards back to their hand with toughness X or less. So with 7 toughness or less, maybe more, maybe less. Very strong effect to board wipe and have a creature to attack with. I do believe I like the other art on this card, but this one goes with the theme of pre-releases with Theros. Here we have Pearl Lake Ancient. With the 7 cost, it's a 6/7 with flash. Can't be countered, so it will not be defeated by other blue cards. Prowess, again, will not be defeated by other blue cards. Return 3 lands you control to their owner's hand. Return 3 lands you control to their owner's hand. Yeah, that's right. Return Pearl Lake Ancient to its owner's hand. Return 3 of your lands, bring them back. You don't really have a use for returning your own lands, but it's nice to have. He's more likely going to be very strong with all your counterspells. And we have Stormtide Leviathan. All your Island Wall creatures love him, and if you have Levitation, no one minds him. For 8 mana, 5, 6, 7, 8, he's an 8/8 creature Leviathan. Looks more like a fish, but, that's pretty cool. Island Walk himself, so attacks for free. All lands are islands in addition to their other types. Wow. Amazing. Creatures without flying or Island Walk can't attack. Give your stuff flying, you're undeterred. All your Island Walk creatures just swinging in for free. Plus, he's benefiting any cards that care about islands. Basically flooding the board, very cool effect. And here we have Inkwell Leviathan, one of the more expensive cards for 9 mana. He's a 7/11. Artifact creature, trample, Island Walk, Shroud. So it has 3 keywords, all of them described, very, very helpful. And the artifact part is the most dangerous effect of this. He is not going to live long because artifacts are very fragile at most parts. The effect of Shroud, giving him the longevity he needs. You yourself can't effectively use him with equipment or buff spells, but this deck is not trying to use buffs. It is trying to counterspell with Voracious Great Shark. When Voracious Great Shark enters the battlefield, counter target creature or spell. 5/4 for 5. So, just upsides, but it is costly for 5. I believe there's instances that give a better rate, but this is getting a body. Stubborn Denial being one of the best cards. Counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. If you can control a creature with 4 power or greater, counter that spell instead. So it's still countering a non-creature, but now it is completely countered if you control something like a Voracious Great Shark. One of the cards to exile with your Arcane Elite Arcanist. Like Muddle the Mixture, you can search out cards like Stasis or some useful effects of Negate as well, because this card only counters instant and sorcery spells. Very niche. It's surprising how often this card becomes niche for 2 mana, considering Counterspell counters anything. The Transmute makes it worth it. I find Transmutation is one of the best effects in Magic because every card becomes Diabolic Tutor. Negate, one of the best cards because half the game or more is creatures, but the other half is non-creatures. Instant sorceries, planeswalkers, and now battles. Very useful to have Remove Soul, counter target creature spell, so the effect of the other half as we go into Essence Scatter, 2 mana again. Counter target creature spell, because Counterspell is one of your favorite cards. Counter target spell for 2 mana, but this time it's 2 blue. You're most likely going to have 2 blue mana, making Counterspell one of the best counterspells of Counterspell. We also have Exclude, which means counter target creature spell, again a niche, but you draw a card. Drawing a card, helping you in the long run, replacing the effect, as we have Complicate. Complicate being one of the best counter spells, not because it counters it for 3 like a mana leak, but at a higher rate, but we have Cycling, and Cycling is slightly faster than instant speed somehow. Your opponent doesn't have as many options to interrupt a cycling effect because it is a special action. Here we have Dissipate, meaning counter target spell. If that spell is countered, exile it instead of putting it to the graveyard. Without the card in their graveyard, on a very strong card, green and black will hate this, because Spell Crumple is for Commander. Commander cards don't want to go to the bottom of the deck. You want everyone else to have their card at the bottom of the deck. Counter target spell for 3. If that spell is countered this way, put it to the bottom of the owner's library instead of putting it into the graveyard. Put Spell Crumple to the bottom of its owner's library, even replacing itself. As we go into Fierce Guardianship, making the Ikoria cards more useful. If you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost. Counter target non-creature spell. For 3 mana, very, very useful because you'll always have 3 mana. But being it for free, I believe it makes it very valuable. Besides Magic the Gathering going towards monetizing commander play, we're going to get more cards like this, obviously. So when you see cards like this in commander precons, I recommend finding the best way to get them early and cheap. You don't want to pay pre-release price, but you do want to pay the standard amount, even if it means buying all 5 commander cards because it's commander decks, if you can afford it. Lord knows, Bone to Ash, counter target creature spell, draw a card, will help you if you still don't have Fierce Guardianship. As well as Rewind, which may even be stronger than Fierce Guardianship, but it's not always talked about, is it? This deck specifically not using dual lands or double lands, but it is using a lot of islands, which could be even more mana, means it could be included. As Dismiss lets you draw a card for countering target spell. 4 mana to counter target spell. More expensive than Dissipate, double the price of Counterspell, but at least you're guaranteed to counter a spell and draw a card with Dismiss. We also have Scatter Arc, counter target non-creature spell, draw a card. And this is going into the theme of every time you play an instant, every time you play a counterspell, you want a benefit. It's not just you're countering the spell, you want to be at card advantage, because Spelljack is coming. For 6 mana, one of the most expensive instants in this deck, counter target spell. If it is countered this way, removed from the game instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. As long as it remains moved from game, you may play it as though it were in your hand without paying its mana cost. If it has X in its mana cost, X is 0. Whenever you want, you may play it. Crazy. Spelljack, extremely useful for counterspell decks. Of course, if they counter your counter, you're fucked. That's why you have cards like Complicate to cycle and interrupt that. Here we have Pongify for cards you can't instant and sorcery speed destroy. Pongify is going to make sure you have an answer to something already on the board. Your opponent has a really nice creature. It is now a 3/3 green ape. Destroy target creature. You could turn to Frog, but if you have a rapid hybridization, you can do the same thing once more. Destroy target creature, it can't be regenerated. If that creature's controller puts a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token onto the battlefield. Doubtful you'll have a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token, so enjoy drawing that. Cyclonic Rift, needing no introduction. Overload, one of the best mechanics. Ravnica having a glut of the best cards. Whatever set it's in. Return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Overload, replace the instance of target with each. Return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Non-land permanent. What a boon for 7. At instant speed, your turn. Even the opponent's creatures won't be able to do anything if you have a Polymorph's Jest. Until the end of turn, each creature target player controls loses all abilities and becomes a blue frog with base power and toughness 1/1. 3 instant, the opponent was going to kill you. They are now attacking with frogs. At 3, it's also a great for blocking. Always remember the priorities of blocking, letting your opponent play all their buffs, and then turning them to frogs to remove all those buffs. Even then, with all your Krakens, Leviathans, you want to be able to engulf the shore, return to their owner's hands all creatures with toughness less than or equal to the number of islands you control. Luckily, your Sky Shroud Leviathan has 11 toughness, and this card costs 4. You might return a lot of your stuff, but if you've been playing strong Leviathans, or maybe it's even a boon to return your stuff before they attack, what a card. I even like the Tentacle Monster within the water, as we have a more combat heavy attack. Ether Spouts. For 5, a combat trick that returns. For each attacking creature, its owner puts it on the top or bottom of his or her library. Yes. Putting cards to the top and bottom of the opponent's library stronger than putting them back to their hand. Now it has stalled out their turns. The effect of making them draw cards, returning those cards back to their hand, rather than the effect of getting damage. Gather Specimens for 6. If a creature would come into play under an opponent's control this turn, it comes into play under your control this turn. Wow. For 6, another heavy cost instant, just under the cost of Cyclonic Rift. The most expensive card, I think, with enchantment cost is 6, 7, 8. Decree of Silence. Whenever an opponent plays a spell, counter that spell and put a depletion counter on Decree of Silence. If there are 3 or more depletion counters on Decree of Silence, sacrifice it. Cycling 6. When you cycle Decree of Silence, you may counter target spell. Again, cycling being an instant action that is beyond countering without another effect like that. It's guaranteed to counter a spell for 6, or for 8, you have a counterspell on the board. Might be a bit outplayed in 3-player, but gives a fun use. Jace, the Unraveler of Secrets for 5. Planeswalker Jace. I believe all Planeswalkers are now legendary because of constant rules updates. +1, scry 1, then just draw a card. +2, return target -2, return target creature to its owner's hand. -8, you get an emblem with whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, counter that spell. Going into that counterspell offensive. 5 counters for 5 cost Planeswalker. +1, 6. He's not going to get many +1/+1 counters, but if you can get to 8, he's useful. As we get to Thada Adel, Acquisitor for 3. Legendary creature, Merfolk Rogue, Island Walk. Whenever Thada Adel Acquisitor, basically a thief. Island Walk. Whenever Thada Adel Acquisitor deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact card and exile it. Then they shuffle their library. Until the end of turn, you may play that card. So only until the end of turn you have the option to play that. You just really want to get rid of their strongest artifacts. In an artifact-heavy deck, it's not often you're going to pull this card, but when you do, you get a very strong effect. As we go to Kefnet, the Mindful. I don't use him often as a creature because of the effect, but as a 3-cost, 5/5, flying indestructible legendary creature god, Kefnet the Mindful can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more cards in hand. You need to have a handful of cards, which is what all those counterspells kept replenishing your hand with. Lucian himself doesn't give a lot of cards, but he definitely keeps you in the positive, as you may pay 4, draw a card, then you may return a land you control to its owner's hand. Again, if you miss your land drop, this card giving you the effect of a land drop, as well as triggering himself to give himself a 5/5 body on the board. And he is flying indestructible, leading to Kaho, another human wizard. For 4 mana, it's a 2/2. Kaho, Minimo Historian. Comes into play, search your library for up to 3 instant cards and remove them from the game. Then shuffle your library. Basically another Arcane Elite Arcanist. For X, you may pay another card with converted mana cost X removed from the game by Kaho without paying its mana cost. Search for 3 of them, play 3 of them. 3 different counterspells is most likely what you're going to look for. As we go into the card that wants the islands the most, and brand new to Magic the Gathering, are the furries. It's Deluge, so you would pronounce him Illuge. The Shoring Sea. So Illuge, the Shoring Sea. Legendary creature, elemental fish. Illuge's power and toughness are equal to the number of islands I control. Whenever Illuge enters or attacks, put a flood counter on target land. It's an island in addition to its other types for as long as it has a flood counter on it. The first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn costs blue less to cast for each land you control with a flood counter on it. So for 4, he's more likely going to be stronger than that. So an Endless Serpent for 4, without the drawback of needing an island to attack with. And turns the opponent's stuff into islands with the flood counters. Flood counters being more useful than tide counters, but the same effect, as you'll find more cards printed with tide counters. Obviously, they printed Deluge, Illuge, and the Alien Zombie card in tandem for this purpose. Nezahal Primal Tide. For 7, you get a legendary dinosaur. Elder Dinosaur, this spell can't be countered. 7/7 for 7. You have no maximum hand size while he's on the field. Whenever an opponent casts a creature spell, draw a card, giving you card advantage. Discard 3 cards, exile Nezahal, Primal Tide. Return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. He can survive extinction events. Your opponent's going to Wrath of God, well, he's going to be one of the few cards that live through that. As we get into one of the few cards that's an 8/8 for 8. When Lorthos, Tidemaker, attacks, you may pay 8. If you do, tap up to 8 permanents. Those permanents don't untap their controller's next untap. You're not often going to be able to attack so often. You want to make sure when you're attacking you will have a powerful effect. This is one of the most powerful effects. Tapping 8 permanents for 8 mana. You want to play this at your advantage, and you'll have the advantage with your mana producing. He's nice. He's strong. He's gonna make sure you have board state. While I have no idea what this says, I think it has something to do with instants and sorceries. Fuck. Oh yeah, this guy. Jinkataxis. Okay, so that's Jinkataxis for 7. This is Jinkataxis for 10. This one I remember as you have an infinite hand size, possibly, drawing 7 cards every turn, and your opponent discards their hand at the end of turn. What the fuck? Why would they print cards? Like, I don't know. I have to pull out my phone. Don't know what this does. And this guy, I don't even know if I should put him in the deck. Ogre, but back. Deepest Epoch. Legendary Creature God. Very cool. What a cool design. And this art, I don't know why they decided to put them on stone plates. This is way better. Flying. Whenever you cast an instant spell from your hand, it gains rebound. I don't think that's going to be useful for your instants and sorceries, but I might be wrong, so you might want to keep them handy. As whenever Ogre Pack dies, return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed under its owner's control with 3 time counters on it. Tap, add blue, remove a time counter from Temple of the Cyclical Time. Transform Temple of the Cyclical Time, activate only if it has no time counters on it, and only as a sorcery. Only as a sorcery. You can't even surprise block with this guy. He's a 4/3 for 4, pretty fragile god. Basically, you want him for your draw power. But Lu Xun, definitely useful, always useful to be able to attack undeterred with horsemanship, giving him flying. Then the opponent also needs horsemanship and flying. What else could you give him? Whisper Silk Cloak, return him to your hand with ninjutsu. Very, very useful cards. And if you can afford to, you can always have your Praetors come into play and giving you a huge bonus before you tap them out and then survive their extinction effects, turn all their lands into islands, or just benefit in the late game with all your island production. Counterspelling anything you need, keeping your god on the field, stealing their artifacts, and if you can, being able to counter every single turn because of card advantage. Very, very fun to play mono blue. I know some people think, well, I don't like counterspelling. I don't like the effects of counterspell. No. Counterspell is just the opposite of a destroy card. If a card says, destroy target non-black creature, you'd rather have counter target non-creature just because its effects are already dealt with. If it has an enter the battlefield effect, like most players will have, it's already too late. So just play counter spells. You have to if you want to be not the best, but if you want to know how the full breadth of the game plays, you need to counterspell.